They underestimated her, assuming she'd be an easy mark, a lone black woman in her solitary abode. Unbeknownst to them, she had eyes on them, always. The moving van arrived on a Tuesday, late in the morning, the sort of hour when most are at their jobs or out and about, but not in Roseville, California, where early retirements and home offices meant neighbors were always vigilant. Before the liftgate even hit the driveway, someone across the street was already watching. Rachel Carrington, aged 42, stood beside her black SUV, clipboard in hand, quietly directing the movers. Tall, her posture was one of confidence, her gaze calm and steady, like someone who didn't bother with trivialities like impressing others. Her attire was practical: jeans, boots, a long-sleeved t-shirt sporting a small breakfast stain. She didn't care. This wasn't a catwalk. It was her new beginning. She'd finalized the purchase of the two-story home a mere month ago. Spanish tile roof, beige stucco, meticulously trimmed hedges, the kind of house that screamed, "I've made it," though her journey to this point was far from what her neighbors imagined. The first visitor was Douglas Varnell, a tall man in khaki shorts and a golf cap, president of the HOA. His handshake was swift and impersonal, his gaze evasive. "Moving in alone?" he asked, casting a glance at the security camera boxes by the front door. "No," Rachel replied succinctly. "Just not everyone's here yet." Douglas nodded, giving her SUV a cursory look before walking away without awaiting a response. "If you need anything, we maintain order here," he called over his shoulder. She observed him retreat behind his neatly trimmed hedges, his gaze lingering on her porch a little too long. Rachel couldn't help but roll her eyes. She'd dealt with her fair share of nosy neighbors before, but this was a new level. By day's end, Rachel had made her new home habitable. Her home office was set up, the hum of her laptop filling the silence as she caught up on work. The blinds were hung, casting a soft glow over the room. The kitchen was stocked with her favorite snacks and a bottle of wine to celebrate her first night in the new place. No signs, no music, no loud guests. Just her, a few plants on the porch for company, and a single folding chair she'd picked up at a yard sale. The next morning, as she sipped her coffee on the porch, she noticed the note tucked under her doormat. A reminder, it read, that all porch decorations must adhere to HOA regulations. No flags, religious items, or political messages allowed. No name, no signature, just a typed note with a stern font. Rachel chuckled, shaking her head. She hadn't even put up a flag. Just a hand-painted ceramic sun, a gift from her niece's art class, hung crookedly beside the door. She decided to leave the sun where it was, a small act of rebellion against the HOA's rigidity. That afternoon, while adjusting her mailbox height, the HOA had flagged it as non-uniform, she noticed a woman in yoga pants walking her dog. The dog paused to sniff a patch of lawn, and the woman's gaze lingered a moment too long on Rachel's porch. "You live here?" the woman finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Looks like it," Rachel replied, standing up straight. She wasn't one to shy away from confrontation, especially when it came to standing up for herself. The woman gave a tight smile, her eyes darting to the ceramic sun. "Well, the HOA is quite particular," she said before quickly walking away, her dog trotting beside her. Rachel watched them go, a sense of determination settling in her chest. She wasn't here to make waves, but she wasn't about to let some HOA dictate her every move. This was her home, her space, and she'd decorate it as she pleased. She just had to figure out how to do it without causing too much of a stir. After all, she didn't want to give them a reason to make her life difficult. But she also wasn't about to live in fear of a bunch of nosy neighbors and their arbitrary rules. Keeps things looking nice. "I read the book," Rachel said. The woman laughed, but there was no humor. "Good. We like our neighborhood a certain way." The message was clear. What they didn't know, what not a single one of them could guess, was that she hadn't just read their little book. She'd read classified briefing reports that could make a senator sweat. She'd navigated language barriers, explosives, and backroom negotiations in countries she couldn't even talk about. A neighborhood association wasn't going to shake her. Still, something was off. She'd moved around plenty of times, new towns, new cities, but there was a kind of performative welcome here. smiles without warmth, small talk laced with monitoring. So she set up the cameras, not because she was paranoid, because she was prepared. One above the door, one at the side entrance, and two at angles in the front yard that covered blind spots the average person wouldn't think twice about. That night, she stood on her porch with a glass of water, watching the streetlights flicker on. A breeze moved the leaves, and a single car passed slowly, then picked up speed once it was beyond her driveway. She wasn't worried, but she didn't feel settled either. She sent a quick message from a burner phone to a contact saved as, "Deb's Plumbing." Settle incomplete, activity already odd, logging first flags stand by, no reply. She didn't need one. But as quiet as things seemed that first week, Rachel had a gut feeling it wouldn't stay that way for long. By the second week, the passive tension had started to grow legs. It began with a parking complaint, a printed notice taped to her mailbox. Driveway must be kept clear of oversized vehicles. Please use garage for storage. Her SUV was neatly parked, not blocking the sidewalk, not touching the neighbor's lawn, and it fit in the driveway just fine. She peeled the paper off and threw it in the recycling bin. The next day, a man she hadn't seen before stood at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, watching her as she watered the succulents in front of her bay window. "Hey there," she called out. He didn't say anything, just stared, then slowly walked away. That night, a second note appeared. This one printed in all caps. "No unauthorized vehicles. Surveillance is active. HOA monitors street traffic. Surveillance." The irony made her laugh. She scanned the perimeter again. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for the growing sense that someone, or several someones, had a problem with her simply existing there. A few days later, the police showed up. It was just after 6 p.m, golden sunlight streaking across the porch. A patrol car rolled up and parked right in front of her home. Two officers, polite but stiff, approached. "Man, we received a call about a disturbance," one of them said. "Reports of loud arguing." She blinked. "I live alone. Any guests this evening?" "No, you're welcome to check." They didn't, but they made a few notes, then left. 15 minutes later, she saw Douglas Varnell again. Same khaki shorts, same walk. He didn't come to the door this time, just stood near his mailbox, talking to the woman in yoga pants. Both looked in her direction. Rachel opened her front door and stepped outside, making it clear she saw them. Douglas nodded once. "Just making sure everything's okay over there," he called out. "I'm fine," she replied. "Good, you know. The police come around when things don't line up with the rules. Noise violations, improper use of property. I pay the same dues as everyone else," she said calmly. He raised his eyebrows like that was a challenge, then went back to his chat. Later that week, the trash pickup skipped her house entirely. While every other bin on the street was emptied by sunrise, hers was left untouched. She called the sanitation department. They had no record of a missed pickup request. "I know this sounds strange," she said, "but could someone have reported my house as vacant?" The woman on the phone paused. "Actually, yes, that's what's in the notes." Rachel exhaled slowly. "I live here. We'll fix it." She hung up and sat on her porch again, phone in her hand, camera light blinking quietly above her. That same night, her back fence gate was found ajar. Not open, just barely swung wide enough to suggest someone had tried it. The lock still clicked into place when she tested it, but the chain had a fresh scuff, like it had been tugged. That was enough for her. She opened the encrypted tablet she kept in a locked drawer in her home office and initiated a low-level alert. Possible harassment escalation, passive monitoring engaged, permission to activate detail. Seconds later, a response. Permission granted, detail reassigning from secondary to active. Karina Bell had lived 2 doors down for years. She was a retired postal worker who loved begonias and talked about her knees more than she talked about politics. Also, it seemed what no one on Briar Hollow caught knew was that Karina had once worked logistics in international security, a discreet assignment out of Langley years ago. She owed Rachel a favor, a big one. That favor had just been called in. The next morning, Karina knocked on Rachel's door with a basket of muffins and a subtle smile. "I figured you might like some company," she said. Rachel accepted them and stepped aside. "I'm guessing you're not just here for a chat." Karina leaned in. "I've already rerouted 2 drones away from your property. HOA is not your only problem." But before Rachel could ask what she meant, a knock came at the door, and this time it wasn't Karina holding baked goods. It was 442 PM when they arrived, not in a squad car, not in a marked HOA vehicle, just a silver sedan with a cracked front headlight and tinted windows that had no business being that dark. 2 men stepped out, khaki pants tucked in polo shirts with laminated badges clipped to their belts, badges that looked like they came off a printer in someone's basement. One of them carried a clipboard, the other had a phone in his hand, pretending to take photos of her yard. Rachel had seen this dance before, not in the suburbs, but in Havana, in Berlin, in Port-au-Prince. The fake official, the intimidation shuffle, the self-appointed authority that crumbles under pressure. She opened her door before they could knock. Karina was still inside, seated calmly on the living room couch, sipping tea like it was just another Wednesday. "You must be Miss Carrington," the one with the clipboard said, all syrup and condescension. "We're with the Briar Hollow HOA Enforcement Committee. Got a couple of things to go over with you." Rachel leaned against the frame. "Your badges don't scan. You're not in the directory, and the HOA doesn't do in-person visits without 72-hour notice." The man blinked, surprised she didn't flinch. "Mom," he said, shifting his tone, "your porch has unauthorized items on it, and we've had several complaints about frequent visitors." "Is that illegal?" she asked, not moving. The second man stepped forward. "We need you to step outside. We'd like to walk you through the infractions." "No, thank you." The first man's smile faded. "Look, we're just trying to help you avoid fines. This could escalate." "I doubt that." They exchanged a look. Then it shifted. Without another word, they moved fast. One tried to grab her arm, the other reached for the screen door. Karina was up before they made contact. "Back away," she said sharply, moving with a precision that didn't belong to a retiree. Her phone was already in her hand, thumb pressing a sequence that wasn't for 911. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men snapped. "Back up," Karina said. The man yanked the door open. Rachel didn't budge. She didn't scream. She didn't swing. She pivoted slightly and brought her hand down hard on the wrist, grabbing her, thumb tucked in, elbow bent. A textbook breakaway move from her training days. The man cursed, stumbling back. "Enough," Rachel said quietly. They weren't ready for that. The second man recovered first. He lunged forward again, but this time the sound of tires crunching gravel made all 3 freeze. 2 dark SUVs turned onto the street. No sirens, no lights, no markings, just smooth, steady presence. The men looked back, trying to calculate. "You can run," Rachel said, "but it'll be worse." The men didn't move. One of them was breathing heavy, the other trying to act unfazed. Within seconds, both SUVs came to a stop. 4 individuals exited, 2 from each vehicle, wearing plain clothes, sunglasses, no show of weapons. They moved as a unit, fast and efficient. The man with the phone tried to bolt. He made it 6 feet before he was on the ground, arm twisted behind his back, his phone skidding across the pavement. The one with the clipboard didn't even try. He just sat down on the porch step like someone had pulled the plug on his bravado. One of the agents, a lean guy with graying hair, looked at Rachel. "Miss Carrington, are you okay?" She nodded. "Minimal contact, no injuries. Camera caught all of it." "Good," he said, then turned to Karina. "Thanks for the ping. Clean extraction." Karina shrugged. Felt like the right moment. Within 10 minutes, the 2 fake enforcers were restrained, ID'd, and seated on the curb like scolded children. Neighbors began peeking through curtains. A few opened garage doors and stood in the shadows, pretending to sweep. No one stepped forward. Not even Douglas Varnell, the taller of the 2 men, now in cuffs, finally spoke. "We were just trying to make sure the neighborhood stayed safe." "From what?" Rachel asked. He didn't answer, but the way his eyes shifted toward Douglas's house made the next move painfully obvious. The taller man's glance toward Douglas Varnell's house didn't go unnoticed, not by Rachel, not by the agents, not even by Karina, who now stood silently beside the porch steps, arms crossed, eyes trained on the street like she was watching a chessboard light up. One of the plainclothes agents, a woman in her late 30s with a clipped New Jersey accent, caught the exchange. She nodded once to her partner and strolled down the sidewalk toward Douglas's front door. He didn't answer the knock. Within minutes, the agent called in a secondary team. No sirens, just unmarked vehicles like before. Clean, cold, silent efficiency. By now, a few more neighbors had come outside, lingering near mailboxes, whispering to each other. None of them approached the house. Rachel stayed seated on her porch, quiet, watching the show unfold. Karina stood next to her, one hand resting lightly on the porch rail. He never was that smart. Karina muttered. "You know him?" Rachel asked. "Not personally, but I've been watching his cameras for weeks." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "The ones he claimed were for wildlife?" "Yeah, funny how wildlife always looks like women walking their dogs or brown kids on bicycles." The clipboard guy, his real name was Gregory Melman, and he had a record for impersonating an officer back in Arizona, was led into one of the SUVs. The other, identified as Ronan Kessler, had a sealed juvenile file and lived just outside city limits. Both were hired hands, not residents. But their paychecks? That led somewhere. One of the agents returned to the porch, crouching to Rachel's eye level. "We're pulling surveillance footage now. Your neighbor across the street has cameras. We're getting access through municipal override. You think he's connected? I think whoever's pulling the strings thought you were an easy target." Rachel looked out across the street. Douglas's front window blinds were now shut tight. "You want to know what's wild?" the agent added. "This kind of thing? It's more common than you think. Fake HOAs, rogue residents, private contractors, all under the radar. But they picked the wrong address this time." Karina chuckled under her breath. Definitely did. An hour later, the feds had enough evidence to knock on Douglas's door. This time, he answered. Rachel didn't hear the entire exchange, but she saw the look on his face when he realized this wasn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. He was being asked about payments made through a shell company, about the frequency of police calls he'd logged from his home, always anonymous, about the fake notices, the false HOA violations. He tried to brush it off. "Just doing my part to keep things orderly," he reportedly said. But order had nothing to do with it. The problem wasn't porch decor or SUVs. The problem was that someone like Rochelle Carrington, with her deliberate movements and unshakable calm, disrupted the illusion of control some people clung to in neighborhoods like this. They weren't used to someone who didn't need their approval, and now every one of their tactics had been documented, timed, and cross-referenced. Back on the porch, Karina leaned close. "You good?" "I'm good," Rochelle said, "but I'm tired of this script." Karina gave a half smile. "Then maybe it's time we rewrite it." By evening, word had spread. 2 arrests, 1 federal investigation opened, and a quiet request for voluntary interviews sent to several homeowners on the block. And not one of them stopped to ask how Rochelle had responded so quickly or why tactical agents had shown up in under 10 minutes. They didn't know about the agency clearance, or the favor owed, or the silent surveillance running in the background for the past 5 weeks. But most importantly, they didn't know who they were messing with, because what they thought would be a quiet removal turned into a spotlight. And now, nobody could pretend they hadn't seen what really lived beneath the surface. By the next morning, the neighborhood was rattled. You could feel it in the way garage doors stayed shut, in how morning walkers skipped their routines. Even the chatty couple on the corner kept to themselves. The usual rhythm had cracked, and everyone knew why. Rochelle sat on her porch again, coffee in hand, one leg crossed over the other. No music, no book, just watching. She'd lived under scrutiny before, in places where smiling at the wrong person could land you in custody. But here in Roseville, the game was played in polite code, neighborhood standards, community values, safety concerns, harassment, wearing a cardigan. Karina strolled over mid-morning, a file tucked under her arm. She didn't speak until she sat down. "They were digging deeper than I thought," she said. Caught 3 more devices near your yard, hidden in sprinkler heads. Rochelle blinked. They planted audio, worse, motion sensors, thermal reads. Somebody was building a case for something, or pretending to. From across the street, a different neighbor, an older woman named Leanne Price, peeked through her curtains. This time she didn't flinch when their eyes met. She was the one who called the cops on me. Twice, Rochelle said quietly. Karina didn't ask how she knew. That afternoon, a federal vehicle returned, this time with official documents. Subpoenas. The investigation had expanded. Douglas Van L's finances revealed a network of payments made to private neighborhood enforcement agents operating under a business called Civic Harmony Consultants, LLC. They weren't just faking HOA credentials, they were part of a loosely organized system built to intimidate. It wasn't new, it wasn't even hidden that well, it just hadn't been challenged until now. And now, with a real federal file attached, it was being taken seriously. A representative from the actual HOA board came by later that day, visibly shaken. A soft-spoken woman named Marisol Dupre clutching a notepad and apologizing every third sentence. "We didn't know, Miss Carrington. Douglas handled all enforcement issues. We never approved any in-person visits." "He told me you did," Rochelle said. Marisol looked down. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, be transparent," Rochelle said. "Let people know what happened." "We will." Before Marisol left, she paused at the bottom of the porch stairs. "If it means anything, we're grateful you didn't retaliate, that you stayed calm." "I didn't stay calm," Rochelle replied. "I stayed prepared." Word spread further than the cul-de-sac. By that weekend, a local news van had shown up. The reporter didn't approach, just filmed quietly from a distance until federal agents asked them to leave. But the story was already moving online. A clip from a neighbor's Ring camera caught part of the confrontation. The fake HOA badge, the shouting, the takedown. Once it hit social media, it sparked outrage. Not just because of what happened to Rochelle, but because of how familiar it felt to so many people. Comments poured in from across the country. "This happened to my dad in Austin." Same story in Phoenix, except the police backed the HOA. People using rules as a weapon. It's real. The quiet streets of Roseville became a talking point, not for their pristine lawns or school ratings, but for what happens when private power thinks it can act without consequence. Later that night, Karina brought over 2 glasses of wine. The sun was down. The porch light buzzed softly above them. "You thinking about moving?" she asked. "No," Rochelle said. "Not yet." Karina nodded. "Good, because it's different now. They know someone's watching back, but the real shift wasn't in the neighbors. It was in Rochelle, who finally saw with crystal clarity how silence gave them room to act, and how one well-timed response could close that door for good. 2 days later, a quiet meeting took place at a nondescript building near the Sacramento Municipal Complex. No press, no flashy headlines, just a table, 4 chairs, and 3 people who knew how the world really worked. Rochelle sat at the end, dressed in all black, a manila folder in front of her. Across from her, Agent Colin Braddock, the lead investigator, assigned to the now open federal inquiry into Civic Harmony Consultants. To his left sat a DHS cybersecurity rep, face unreadable. Karina was on Rochelle's right, calm as ever. "What you're dealing with," Braddock began, "goes beyond this HOA or even this neighborhood. The group you flagged? They've been operating in clusters across several western states." Rochelle nodded. "They prey on slow accountability. Local HOAs, retirement communities, gated suburbs." Braddock tapped a tablet. "They build fake authority, weaponized bylaws, target anyone who doesn't fit. Usually folks with out-of-state tags, people who look different, sound different, especially if they move in quietly. They did more than fake authority," Karina said. "They were gathering intel." The DHS rep looked up. "Your house had passive thermal tags. That's not HOA tech. That's surplus military grade." Braddock leaned forward. "Here's the part you're not going to like. There's a flagged communication from 6 months ago. One of our side channels picked it up, but it wasn't prioritized." He slid the document across the table. A printout of an encrypted email chain, the subject line. New resident confirmed background CIA link? Rochelle read in silence. Someone was looking into me before I even closed escrow. We believe so, Braddock said. They didn't know who you were exactly, but they knew enough to be nervous. That's why the harassment started almost immediately. They were testing boundaries. And if I'd pushed back too hard, she said, they'd claim I was the problem. He nodded. It's a pattern. They provoke until the target reacts. Then they escalate. Create enough of a paper trail to make you look unstable. Karina spoke up. They messed with the wrong one this time. Braddock smirked. That's what we're hearing. It wasn't just personal anymore. It never had been. What Rochelle walked into wasn't a neighborhood spat. It was part of a larger system that counted on quiet compliance. After the meeting, as they walked to the car, Karina broke the silence. You think it'll stick this time? Charges exposure. They'll bury some of it, Rochelle said. Protect homeowners, sweep details under the rug. But someone's watching now. It's not invisible anymore. Later that evening, back at home, she pulled out a dusty photo album from her bedroom closet, the kind she hadn't opened in years. Inside were snapshots from old assignments, some blurred faces, others clipped from foreign newspapers. But tucked between them was a worn photo of her mother standing outside their house in Paterson, New Jersey, back when a crooked neighbor had tried to evict them over a zoning complaint. She'd fought back quietly, relentlessly, and won. That fire lived on. At dusk, Rochelle walked out onto her porch again. This time she wasn't alone. A few neighbors, ones who had avoided her up till now, were walking dogs, watering plants, pretending not to glance over. One man across the street gave a small wave. She didn't return it. Not yet. She sat, crossed her arms, and stared out at the cul-de-sac she now saw clearly. Not as a haven, but as a reflection. I used to think I could just buy peace, she said aloud. Karina, who had rejoined her, replied without looking up from her phone. You still can. It just costs more than most people expect. They stayed there, silent for a long while. Inside, the cameras recorded everything. Not because she expected another attack, but because documentation was now part of survival. And while the threat had passed for now, Rochelle knew better than to believe it was over. The real win wasn't in one arrest or one scandal. It was in not letting herself shrink ever again. A week later, life on the block had returned to its polished rhythm. But not for everyone. The lawn services were back. Kids rode bikes again. But there was a new kind of awareness in the air, especially when people passed the Carrington house. Some waved now. Some avoided eye contact altogether. One or two even looked like they wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. Rochelle didn't wait for them to figure it out. She spent her mornings working from her home office, her nights catching up on the garden she'd barely touched since moving in. She started walking around the block again, not because she had to, but because she could. Power wasn't just about protection, it was about being visible without permission. Karina showed up one evening holding a folded lawn chair and a cold bottle of mineral water. Thought I'd keep you company. They sat in silence for a bit, watching the sky shift into soft orange. I've been thinking. Karina said, Why do you think they were so bold? I mean, they didn't know who you were. But still, they didn't need to know. Rochelle answered. They just assumed I wouldn't fight back. Karina nodded. Because most people don't. Because most people can't. They let that hang in the air. Because it was true. Not everyone has a federal contact on speed dial. Not everyone has decades of tactical training. Not everyone has a Karina 2 doors down. And that's the point. What happened in Roseville wasn't just about bias or intimidation. It was about a structure that made it easy for people to play gatekeeper behind fake authority, fake concern, fake neighborly smiles. They'd built a system that worked until someone broke the script. Later that night, Rachel sat at her desk writing a letter. Not to the HOA, not to her neighbors, but to a young woman she didn't know yet. Someone who'd face her own version of this one day. She wrote, Don't wait to be given space. Take it. Quietly if you can, loudly if you must. They'll test you, but they always misjudge what they don't understand. Keep receipts, keep calm, And above all, stay visible, even when they want you invisible. She folded the paper, tucked it into a journal, and slipped it onto a shelf next to her badge. Not a trophy, not a memory, a reminder. Because this wasn't just about a porch, or a fence, or a neighborhood rule book. It was about how far people will go to protect their illusion, and how quickly that illusion falls when someone stands up and refuses to move. The next Sunday, a community notice went out, a town hall meeting to restore trust and transparency in neighborhood enforcement. Douglas Van L's name was quietly removed from all HOA records. No official explanation. No one asked Rachel to attend, but she went anyway. She sat in the back row, said nothing, just listened. Not to the words, but to the shifting tone, the nervous coughs, the careful wording, the change in posture when someone realized she was in the room. Afterward, on her way out, Leanne Price stopped her. "I didn't know things got that serious," she said, fumbling with her purse strap. "We just thought something was off." "What was off?" Rachel asked. Leanne hesitated. "I guess I didn't expect you to be so prepared. I didn't expect to need to be." They stood there for a moment. Then Leanne gave a short nod and walked off. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was the start of reckoning. That night, Rachel posted a single sentence on her rarely used social media account. "Politeness won't save you, but preparedness might." The video spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of millions within days. What started as a spectacle of drama evolved into a collective awakening. People began to see the underlying pattern, the silent resistance, the quiet power. Because strength isn't always overt or aggressive. Sometimes it's subtle, like a chair placed defiantly on a porch, a security camera positioned strategically, a voice that remains steady and unyielding in the face of adversity. If this tale resonated with you, if it stirred something within you, then hit that subscribe button. Share this story, amplify this voice, because there's someone else out there right now who needs to hear it, who needs to know they're not alone. This isn't just a story about standing up to bullies or challenging the status quo. It's a reminder that change begins with a single, unyielding voice, and it spreads like a wildfire, one spark at a time.